Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC, into the gens Julia, an old patrician family that claimed mythical descent from Manius, the Trojan hero, and thus from Venus herself. On paper, that ancestry sounded glorious, but in practical political terms, the family wasn't at the very top of Roman power when Caesar was a child. They were respected, yes, but not dominant. The Rome he grew up in was a republic run by magistrates elected annually, consuls, praetors, aediles supervised by the Senate, and interrupted regularly by moments of crisis, factional infighting, and violence. Two major political blocs were beginning to harden in Caesar's youth. There were the optimates, the best men, who tended to defend the traditional powers of the Senate and the aristocracy, and the populares, who appealed more directly to the people. Using popular assemblies and tribunes to push through reforms, Caesar, partly through upbringing and partly through his own temperament, gravitated toward the populares. A key early influence was his connection to Gaius Marius, the brilliant general and seven-time consul, who married into Caesar's family. Marius was married to Caesar's aunt, Julia. Marius had reformed the Roman army, opened recruitment to the poorer classes, and built a power base among veterans and the urban poor. Opposed to him was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, another formidable general from the aristocratic camp. Their rivalry escalated into outright civil war. This conflict, often overshadowed by Caesar's later civil war, was the first major example in Caesar's lifetime of Roman politics turning into large-scale domestic bloodshed. When Sulla eventually triumphed and marched on Rome, he unleashed proscriptions, official hit lists on which enemies of his regime were named, their property confiscated, and their lives forfeit. Caesar, still very young, had already chosen a dangerous side. He had married Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, one of Marius' allies. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce her, an order meant as a test of loyalty and submission. Caesar refused. This refusal almost cost him his life, and it surely impressed those who later saw him as a man unwilling to bend easily. Friends and relatives with influence interceded on his behalf. Sulla grudgingly spared him, but is said to have remarked that in Caesar he saw many Mariuses, a warning that this young man might one day be as dangerous as the older general he had just defeated. It's a revealing comment. Even as a young man without any great office, Caesar had presence and potential that senior figures could sense. With his public career effectively blocked under Sulla's dominance, Caesar left Rome and served in the army in Asia Minor. There he distinguished himself in siege operations at Mytilene and even won the civic crown Corona Civica for bravery, one of Rome's highest honors for a soldier who saved a fellow citizen's life in battle. This military chapter sharpened his skills as a commander and gave him a taste of something he would always treasure: the loyalty and camaraderie of fighting men formed in real campaigns. One of the more colorful episodes of his youth came during a sea voyage in the eastern Mediterranean, when Caesar was captured by pirates near the island of Pharmacusa. The pirates demanded ransom. Caesar, unimpressed, joked that they were asking far too little for someone of his importance and insisted they increase the amount. While he waited for the money to arrive, he mixed haughty confidence with good humor, joining in their games, reciting poetry, even warning them, half in jest, that when he was free he would come back and have them crucified. The pirates, thinking him amusing, laughed it off. When the ransom arrived and Caesar was freed, he immediately raised a small force, hunted down the pirates, seized them, and did indeed crucify them, tempering the horror only by ordering their throats cut first to shorten their suffering. It's a story that captures both sides of Caesar, charming and bold, but also utterly ruthless when he felt his authority or his word was at stake. After Sulla's death in 78 BC, the political atmosphere in Rome slowly opened up, and Caesar began the long, methodical climb up the cursus honorum, the ladder of public offices that ambitious Roman nobles followed. He served in a variety of roles, first as a military officer, then as quaestor, aedile, praetor, each step giving him more visibility, more allies, and more experience. As quaestor, a financial official in Spain, he would have started to grasp how provincial administration worked and how wealth flowed into Rome from abroad. Later, as a deal, he took on the responsibility of organizing public games and maintaining temples and public buildings. Here, his political style became obvious. He spent lavishly. He adorned public spaces, staged impressive spectacles, and used banquets and gladiatorial shows to win public support. He drove himself into heavy personal debt in the process, but in Roman politics, debt could be an investment. By making himself popular with the masses, he gained a base of support that could later be converted into votes and influence. One of the most politically sensitive steps in his career came in 63 BC, when Caesar ran for the powerful post of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Rome's state religion. The role was not just religious, it carried immense prestige and influence. He was relatively young and up against older, more established candidates, but through aggressive campaigning, promises, and no doubt more spending, he won. This gave him not only a grand house in the Forum area but also a permanent footprint in the heart of Rome's public life. That same year, Rome faced internal crisis in the form of the Catilinarian conspiracy, a plot by the aristocrat Catiline and his associates to overthrow the government. The consul Cicero, a brilliant orator and statesman, exposed the conspiracy and drove Catiline out of the city. The Senate then faced a crucial question: what to do with the captured conspirators in Rome. Cicero and his allies argued that they should be executed without a formal trial, on the grounds that they were an immediate danger to the state. Caesar took a more cautious, legally minded line. He argued in the Senate that they should be imprisoned in various Italian towns instead, warning that bypassing legal protections, even for traitors, set a dangerous precedent. It was an early example of Caesar's instinct to appeal over the heads of the Senate to more popular notions of justice, and it put him at odds with key conservative figures. In the end, others, notably Cato the Younger, persuaded the Senate to approve execution, and the conspirators were strangled in the Tullianum prison. Caesar's stance did not prevail. But it marked him out as someone who would challenge rigid traditionalists and who was willing to stake a position that blended principle with a keen eye for popularity. As his career advanced, Caesar consistently aligned himself with the populares. He sponsored laws that favored the poor, supported grain distributions, and defended tribunes whose powers were often challenged by the Senate's elite. But he needed powerful allies and money to sustain his rise. He found one in Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, who had made his fortune in real estate, business, and, notoriously, by buying up confiscated property after Sulla's proscriptions. Crassus financially backed Caesar, covering debts and guaranteeing loans, while Caesar offered Crassus political support and popularity with the people that Crassus himself lacked. On the other side was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, a celebrated general who had defeated pirates in the Mediterranean and conquered territories in the east, returning to Rome loaded with prestige and troops loyal to him. The Senate feared Pompey and tried to limit his influence by dragging their feet when it came to ratifying his settlements and granting land for his veterans. Pompey, frustrated, drifted away from the conservative optimates. Caesar saw an opportunity in the growing distance between Pompey and the Senate. In 60 BC, he orchestrated a political alliance that has gone down in history as the first triumvirate, a private, informal pact among three powerful men: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Each brought something vital. Caesar brought popular support and political skill, Pompey, his military glory and veterans, Crassus, his immense wealth and connections. Together, they could override senatorial resistance and push through measures that each of them wanted. As part of this alliance, Caesar ran for the consulship of 59 BC and won. His time as consul was turbulent and aggressive. He pushed through agrarian laws to grant land to Pompey's veterans and poor citizens, and he often did so over the protests of conservative senators. When colleagues and opponents resisted, he bypassed them, took issues directly to the popular assemblies, and relied on the backing of his partners. His style in office caused outrage among the optimates, who saw in him an ambitious demagogue, and admiration among the masses, who saw him as a champion of their interests. Caesar also cemented his alliance with Pompey through marriage. He arranged for Pompey to wed his own daughter, Julia, who, by all accounts, became deeply attached to her husband. This marital link gave the political partnership a warmer, more personal dimension for a while. At the end of his consulship, Caesar secured a proconsular command, the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Illyricum, soon extended to include Transalpine Gaul, southern France. It was supposed to be a 5-year appointment, later renewed, and it gave him something he urgently needed: a large provincial base, command of legions, and the chance to earn military glory and wealth to overshadow his political meddling in Rome. What might have been a fairly standard provincial command turned, under his leadership, into one of the most famous and brutal campaigns in ancient history: the conquest of Gaul. When Caesar arrived in Gaul in 58 BC, the region was a mosaic of tribal territories: Helvetii, Idui, Arverni, Belgae, and many others. Roman influence was present in the south, but large parts of what we now call France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland and Germany were outside direct Roman control. Caesar presented his moves as defensive, responding to tribal migrations that threatened Roman allies, or intervening in local conflicts to stabilize Rome's northern frontier. But it became clear very quickly that he saw in Gaul an opportunity to build a record of conquests that would rival and perhaps surpass Pompey's. The first major trigger was the movement of the Helvetii, a Celtic tribe from what is now Switzerland, who planned to migrate westward across Roman territory. Caesar blocked their path, citing defense of Roman allies, and defeated them in a series of engagements. He compelled the survivors to return to their homeland, claiming to have preserved the balance of power in the region. It was a clever combination of force and political justification. From there, Caesar moved deeper into Gaul, fighting against the Idui's rivals, confronting the Belgae in the north, and launching expeditions even beyond the Rhine into Germanic territory. Each campaign brought him fresh victories, plunder, and, crucially, legions who had marched and fought under his command alone. These men became intensely loyal to him, not to the distant Senate, and this bond would later play a decisive role in Roman politics. To publicize and frame his actions, Caesar wrote the Commentary di Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, a series of reports sent back to Rome. Written in a clear, direct style, and technically in the third person to give the impression of objectivity, they presented his campaigns as necessary, measured, and successful operations to defend Rome and bring order to barbarian lands. They were also powerful political propaganda, shaping how the Roman public perceived his role in Gaul. Through these commentaries, Caesar communicated straight to the Roman people, bypassing Senate narratives. The campaigns in Gaul were not simple marches of progress. Caesar often exploited divisions among the Gallic tribes, allying with some against others, promising protection, then demanding taxes, grain, and hostages as guarantees of loyalty. His actions could be harsh: whole communities were slaughtered or enslaved when they resisted. One famous and grim example was his treatment of the Usipetes and Tencteri, Germanic tribes he accused of treachery, leading to their massacre, including civilians. Even in his own account, there are hints of the scale of violence involved. But from a strictly military and political perspective, Caesar's achievements in Gaul were staggering. He defeated coalitions of tribes, besieged strongholds, and even undertook two brief but symbolically important invasions, one across the Rhine into Germanic lands, where he famously built a large timber bridge in a matter of days, crossed, demonstrated Roman reach, and then withdrew, and another across the Channel into Britain, the first Roman army to set foot on that island. These expeditions were not full conquests, but they added to his mystique as a commander who could go where no Roman general had gone before. Back in Rome, his successes brought mixed reactions. Among the masses, Caesar's victories and spoils were widely admired. His dispatches were read with excitement. His name carried the aura of triumph. Among the Senate and the Optimates, however, anxiety grew. A general with a veteran army and a heroic reputation was, in Roman history, potentially a dictator in the making. Memories of Marius and Sulla were still fresh. Moreover, Caesar's alliance with Pompey and Crassus, the first triumvirate, was starting to fray. The marriage bond between Pompey and Caesar weakened when Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth in 54 BC. Her death removed a human link that had helped keep their political partnership from turning purely transactional or hostile. Around the same time, Crassus sought military glory to match Caesar and Pompey. He obtained command against the Parthians in the east, but his campaign ended disastrously at Carrhae in 53 BC, where he was killed and his army shattered. With Crassus gone, the triangle collapsed into a line: Pompey and Caesar, former allies now facing each other as potential rivals. In Rome, unrest and political violence increased. The Senate, more and more dominated by Pompey's allies, positioned him as a stabilizing figure. In 52 BC, after street riots and the murder of the populist politician Clodius Pulcher, Pompey was appointed sole consul for a time, underscoring his unique standing. Laws were passed that, when read together, tightened the net around Caesar. One key issue was what would happen when Caesar's command in Gaul ended. Traditionally, a general had to lay down his command and return to Rome as a private citizen before standing for high office again. By 50 BC, the Senate, under the influence of men like Cato and with Pompey as their champion, demanded that Caesar disband his legions and return to Rome to submit to legal scrutiny. Caesar, sensing a trap, refused unless Pompey also disbanded his army and stepped down from his extraordinary commands. This was something Pompey and the Senate were not willing to do. The deadlock hardened. Letters went back and forth. Envoys carried proposals and counter-proposals. Caesar signaled, at least publicly, a willingness to compromise, but he also quietly prepared his forces. His position was fortified by the intense loyalty of his legions, especially the famous 10th Legion, and by the personal admiration many Romans still had for his achievements and generosity. The tension came to a head in early 49 BC. The Senate, pushed by Caesar's enemies, passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree of the Senate, effectively declaring a state of emergency and charging Pompey with the defense of the Republic. Caesar was now essentially an outlaw if he did not comply. The boundary between his province and Italy proper was marked by a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon. By law, no general was allowed to cross it into Italy with an army. Doing so meant civil war. Caesar advanced southward from Gaul with 1 legion, pausing at the Rubicon. In later retellings, this moment became almost theatrical, Caesar hesitating, weighing the future at the river's edge, then stepping forward with the famous phrase "Alia acta state," the die is cast. Whether he actually spoke those exact words or not, the decision was clear. By leading his troops across that narrow stream into Italy, he knowingly triggered the next phase of his career and of Roman history, the civil war between himself and Pompey. This is where we will pause for now. In this first segment, we followed Julius Caesar from his birth into a relatively modest but proud patrician family, through the chaos of Sulla's dictatorship, his early military experiences, his bold stand against Sulla's demand, his capture by pirates, his steady rise up the Roman political ladder, his alliance with Crassus and Pompey, his controversial consulship, and his dramatic and violent conquest of Gaul. We've left him at the brink of civil war, with 1 foot on either side of the Rubicon, well aware that there is no turning back. When Julius Caesar stepped across the Rubicon in 49 BC with a single legion at his back, he didn't just violate a long-standing law. He shattered the illusion that the Roman Republic's rules were stronger than the ambitions of its most powerful men. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" survives today precisely because everyone at the time understood the stakes. Once he led armed troops onto Italian soil, there would be no easy reconciliation, no quiet retirement. The conflict between him and Pompey, and between 2 competing visions of how Rome should be governed, had moved from speeches and decrees into the realm of war. Caesar's immediate challenge was practical. He had only a fraction of the forces Pompey could theoretically muster. Pompey held legal authority from the Senate and enjoyed broad support among the optimates. Many senators, magistrates, and equestrians fled Rome with him, heading south toward Brundisium and then east to Greece, where he could draw on the vast pool of men and resources in the eastern province. Caesar, by contrast, advanced into Italy with relatively small but highly experienced and loyal forces. His progress through Italy in those first weeks was surprisingly swift and, in many places, bloodless. Towns opened their gates. Local commanders often chose not to resist. Caesar understood that how he conducted himself in this phase would shape public opinion. He was careful to present himself as the defender of the rights of the tribunes and of the people, not as a brutal usurper. He emphasized clemency. Captured opponents were frequently released. Property was not indiscriminately looted. These choices had a political purpose. He wanted to isolate his hardline enemies while reassuring the broader population that he wasn't another Sulla coming to unleash proscriptions and vengeance. Meanwhile, Pompey's strategic decision was to withdraw rather than risk a major battle in Italy. He calculated that time was on his side. He could gather a superior army in Greece, backed by powerful naval forces, and then return to crush Caesar on Roman soil. From a purely logistical perspective, that made sense. But politically, abandoning Italy and Rome itself allowed Caesar to walk into the capital almost unopposed, seizing the symbolic heart of the Republic. Once in Rome, Caesar had to manage the machinery of government even as civil war loomed. To give himself legal cover, he arranged to be appointed dictator, but only for a very brief term, long enough to oversee elections and get himself chosen as consul for 48 BC. Then, after just 11 days, he resigned the dictatorship, an odd but revealing move. It signaled that, at this stage, he still wanted to appear as if he was operating within a legal framework rather than ruling indefinitely by decree. With the political formalities in place, Caesar turned his attention back to the military situation. He needed to confront Pompey directly. However, he faced a serious handicap at sea. Pompey's supporters controlled much of the fleet. Caesar improvised. First, he secured Spain, where Pompey had client commanders and legions. Moving with characteristic speed, he marched west, defeated Pompeian forces, and neutralized that flank before crossing to Greece. His remark to his troops before the Spanish campaign, "I am going against an army without a leader. When I've beaten them, I'll be going against a leader without an army," captures both his confidence and his understanding of how to break an opponent's power base step by step. Eventually, at Pharsalus in central Greece in 48 BC, the two armies confronted each other in a full-scale pitched battle. Pompey's legions outnumbered Caesar's, and his cavalry was particularly strong. Caesar, recognizing that his horsemen might be overwhelmed, placed a line of concealed infantry behind his own cavalry on his right flank. When Pompey's cavalry charged and initially pushed Caesar's horsemen back, these hidden infantrymen stepped forward, attacking with short swords, targeting the riders' faces, and throwing them into confusion. Pompey's crucial cavalry advantage collapsed. Caesar's legions then pressed in, seizing the initiative and rolling up parts of the Pompeian line. The result was a clear victory for Caesar. Pompey, realizing the battle was lost, fled the field and eventually made his way to Egypt, hoping that his past support of the Ptolemaic regime would earn him sanctuary. Instead, in a scene as tragic as it is revealing of the brutal realpolitik of the age, he was murdered on the orders of advisors to the young King Ptolemy XIII, who thought that presenting Caesar with Pompey's severed head would win favor with the new master of Rome. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria and was shown Pompey's head, he is reported to have turned away in disgust and wept. Whether the tears were purely personal or partly for effect, they fit a pattern. Caesar wanted to be seen as magnanimous in victory. He might defeat rivals, but he preferred, wherever possible, to spare and forgive rather than annihilate. Pompey's offstage killing robbed him of the chance to show clemency and further positioned him, in his own telling, as a victim of others' cruelty rather than its author. Caesar's stay in Egypt, intended initially as a brief stop, turned into a longer and more complicated episode. He arrived to find Egypt in the middle of a dynastic struggle between Ptolemy XIII and his sister and co-ruler, at least in name Cleopatra VII. Caesar involved himself in local politics, partly to secure Rome's interests in a wealthy and strategically important kingdom. Cleopatra, famously intelligent, charismatic, and politically astute, formed an alliance with Caesar that was both political and personal. Introduced to him, according to one tradition, smuggled into the palace rolled in a carpet or bedding, she quickly demonstrated that she could be a valuable partner. Caesar backed Cleopatra's claim to the throne. The ensuing Alexandrian War saw street fighting, palace intrigue, and naval combat within the city's harbors. At one point, Caesar was nearly trapped and had to swim to a friendly ship, holding important documents above the water. Eventually, with reinforcements, he defeated Ptolemy's forces. Ptolemy XIII drowned while trying to escape, and Cleopatra was installed as queen, nominally co-ruling with another younger brother, but in practice wielding primary power. During this period, Cleopatra bore a son, Ptolemy XV Philopator Philometor Caesar, better known by the nickname Caesarine Little Caesar. Caesar never formally recognized him in Roman law, but in Egypt and later in Cleopatra's own propaganda, the boy was presented as Caesar's child and heir. The relationship with Cleopatra would later give Caesar's enemies more ammunition. They could paint him as a man seduced by an exotic queen, half committed to Roman values and dreaming of a Hellenistic-style monarchy. From Egypt, Caesar moved through the eastern Mediterranean, mopping up resistance. In Asia Minor, he defeated Pharnaces, the son of Mithridates of Pontus, with such speed that he wrote his famously concise report to the Senate, Veni, Vidi. Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. It was a perfect, almost theatrical line, distilling his style quick, decisive, and keenly aware of how to present his victories. But the civil war was not yet completely over. Back in North Africa, Pompeian loyalists and conservative senators regrouped with King Juba I of Numidia. Caesar crossed to Africa and, at the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC, decisively defeated this coalition. Several of his old enemies, including Cato the Younger, chose suicide rather than accept his pardon or live under his dominance. Their deaths, particularly Cato's, were later used by Caesar's opponents as symbols of republican virtue resisting tyranny. After Africa, Caesar turned to Spain, where Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, had rallied more opposition. At Munda in 45 BC, Caesar fought one of his toughest battles, at one point reportedly stepping into the front ranks to steady his faltering troops. Ultimately, he prevailed once more. Gnaeus Pompey was killed, Sextus escaped and would cause problems for Caesar's successor, Octavian, but the last major military resistance to Caesar himself was now ended. With his last serious rivals defeated, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed leader of the Roman world. The Senate granted him a series of honors and extraordinary powers. He was repeatedly made dictator, at first for limited terms like 10 years, and finally dictator perpetual, dictator for life. He was named prefect of morals, given special control over the treasury, and his person was declared sacrosanct. Statues of him were set up among those of the gods. His image appeared on coins, something virtually unheard of for living Romans before him. Even the month of Quintilis in the Roman calendar was later renamed Julius July in his honor. At the same time, he embarked on an ambitious program of reforms. Caesar was not just a soldier and political operator, he could also think administratively and long-term. The Republic, shaken by decades of turmoil, needed change. He reformed local government, worked on road networks, planned new public works and buildings, and considered grand projects like draining marshes and developing harbors. He extended Roman citizenship to many communities that had previously lacked it, binding more people directly to Rome as full participants in its civic life. In his own eyes, and in the eyes of many ordinary Romans, he was reordering a crumbling, corrupt system into something more efficient and more responsive. Yet even as he stabilized and modernized aspects of Roman administration, worries about his personal dominance grew more intense among the Republican elite. The pileup of honors and symbols around Caesar did not help. Statues showed him with laurel wreaths that might hide a thinning hairline but also echoed royal imagery. The title dictator for life sounded uncomfortably permanent. He sat on a special gilded chair, wore special robes, and celebrations increasingly centered on him as a unique figure rather than on the shared institutions of the Republic. Several specific incidents ignited anxiety. During a public ceremony, some of Caesar's supporters, notably Mark Antony, attempted to place a diadem or royal headband on his head, effectively presenting him as king. The crowd's reaction was mixed, and Caesar, sensing the danger, declined the diadem, saying Jupiter alone was king of the Romans. But the fact that the attempt was made at all, in public, suggested to many that Caesar, or at least his inner circle, were testing the waters for outright monarchy. Rome had a deep, almost instinctive aversion to the word rex, king, rooted in the legendary expulsion of the Tar Queen kings centuries earlier. Even strongman leaders had always been careful not to claim that title, so when rumors spread that Caesar might accept kingship, or that he had been offered, and only refused for show, Republican sensibilities were badly shaken. Caesar also sometimes handled the Senate in ways that looked high-handed. On one occasion, when senators rose nervously to greet him, he failed to rise in return. Whether from illness, distraction, or arrogance, the perceived slight was remembered. His willingness to openly forgive and promote former enemies, while admirable in some ways, also created a strange climate. Men who had fought against him now owed their lives and positions to his personal favor, not to the old, impersonal system of law and office. In this atmosphere, a group of senators became convinced themselves that the only way to preserve what remained of the Republic was to eliminate Caesar. Among them were Gaius Cassius Longinus, a bitter adversary, and, more surprisingly to many, Marcus Junius Brutus, a man with a reputation for philosophical seriousness and republican virtue, and a relative by adoption of the Brutus who, according to legend, had helped drive out Rome's last king. Caesar had spared Brutus after the civil war, promoted him, and appears to have trusted him. Brutus' participation gave the conspiracy a symbolic weight it would not otherwise have had. The conspirators framed their plan as an act of tyrannicide, the killing of a tyrant for the sake of liberty. They met in secret, discussed who else might be brought in, and who should be kept at a distance, and chose a date and place, the Ides of March 15, 44 BC. At a session of the Senate in the Theatre of Pompey, since the usual Senate house was under repair. Ancient sources report that in the days leading up to the Ides, Caesar received warnings. Soothsayers supposedly cautioned him to beware the Ides of March. His wife, Calpurnia, had disturbing dreams of his statue bleeding, and begged him not to go to the Senate that day. Letters may have been thrust into his hand with warnings that he didn't take time to read. Whether we should take every detail at face value or see some as later literary embellishments, the overall impression is clear. There was an air of foreboding. On the morning in question, Caesar debated staying home. But one of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, persuaded him to attend, arguing that to cancel might look weak or fuel rumors. Caesar agreed. He left his home and made his way through the city to the theater complex, likely surrounded by lictors carrying the fasces, the bundles of rods and axes symbolizing his authority, and perhaps by supporters and onlookers. Inside the building, the conspirators took their positions, concealing daggers beneath their togas. When Caesar entered the Senate meeting space, he took his seat. The senators rose to greet him, then closed in, ostensibly to present petitions. This tight formation was unusual but not, in itself, enough to alarm him. As one conspirator approached from behind, others distracted him from the front. Then, on a signal, they struck. The first blow, by Servilius Casca, was poorly aimed and more a cut than a fatal wound. Caesar, startled, reportedly grabbed Casca's arm and cried out something like, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" But the point of no return had been crossed. The other conspirators drew their blades and joined in. Within seconds, Caesar was surrounded by men stabbing at him from all sides. He struggled briefly, then, realizing the scope of the attack, tried to pull his cloak over his head and lower body, perhaps to die with some dignity and to avoid being seen in disarray. He received numerous wounds. Ancient sources differ on the exact number, but several were deep and fatal. The detail that he recognized Brutus among the attackers and said, "Et tu, Brute, Brutus is famous, but it may be a dramatization by later writers like Shakespeare. Ancient accounts suggest he may have said nothing, or something shorter, like a Greek phrase meaning child, whatever words, if any, passed his lips. The shock of seeing Brutus among his killers would have been immense. He collapsed at the base of a statue of Pompey, an eerie, almost theatrical coincidence, as if the place where his great rival's memory was enshrined was also the stage for his death. His blood pooled on the floor of the Senate chamber. The conspirators, their togas stained red, rushed out into the open, some reportedly shouting, "Liberty! Freedom!" believing, or hoping, that the people would hail them as saviors of the Republic. The immediate aftermath did not go as they expected. The populace did not rejoice. Nor did the Senate spontaneously reassert a healthy republican system. Instead, confusion, fear, and anger spread. Many asked, if Caesar was a tyrant, why had he been so consistently generous in pardoning opponents and giving land and citizenship to others? Would his killers restore order, or were they just opening the door to more chaos? Into this uncertainty stepped two key figures, Mark Antony and Gaius Octavius, better known later as Octavian, and eventually as Augustus. Antony had been Caesar's colleague, ally, and loyal lieutenant. Octavian was Caesar's grandnephew, a young man studying in Illyricum when the assassination took place, but named in Caesar's will as his adopted son and principal heir. Antony moved quickly. He brokered an easy initial compromise. The conspirators would not be immediately punished. Caesar's acts and appointments would remain valid. This gave everyone a little breathing space. But the balance began to tilt when Caesar's funeral was held. During the public ceremony, Antony delivered a powerful speech, reading from Caesar's will, which left gifts of money and gardens to the Roman people. He displayed Caesar's bloodied cloak and pointed to the wounds, stirring the crowd emotionally. The audience, many of whom had benefited from Caesar's generosity, reacted with rage and grief. Violence broke out. Some of the assassins, sensing the shift, fled Rome altogether. Octavian, for his part, returned to Italy and quietly began building his own base of support, claiming the name Gaius Julius Caesar by adoption. In the years that followed, Antony, Octavian, and for a time Lepidus formed what historians call the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned three-man rule only to eventually fall out and fight one another. This second round of civil wars ended with Octavian's victory at Actium in 31 BC and his establishment as Rome's first emperor in all but name. Under him, the Roman world shifted from republic to principate, an autocratic system wrapped in republican forms. In a deep and somewhat ironic sense, the assassins failed to restore what they claimed to defend. Instead of reviving the old republic, they helped clear the path for a more stable, long-lasting monarchy under Caesar's adoptive heir. The name Caesar itself became a title of Caesar for the imperial family, later echoed in words like Kaiser and Czar. So how should we see Julius Caesar, looking back across more than 2,000 years? He was, undeniably, one of Rome's most gifted military commanders. His campaigns in Gaul, his speed and daring in the Civil War, his ability to inspire and manage troops, and his readiness to take calculated risks all contribute to that reputation. His own commentaries, while biased, show a mind that could analyze terrain, morale, and logistics clearly. Modern military thinkers have studied his campaigns for lessons in maneuver, concentration of force, and psychological warfare.